Hey, I have investigated quite a bit of time today to set up Mosquitto on a Docker container, and I thought, okay, I'll just make a video and share it with the world. Uh, so yeah, let's get started by creating a Docker compose.yml file. I will just quickly write the basic stuff to make sure that you don't need to worry about those. So our services name would be Mosquitto. You can just write anything you'd like. I would prefer to write a short container name, and the image would be Eclipse Mosquitto, but we don't need to define latest because by default Docker will always get the latest version when we don't define anything. We'll also make sure that we define restart always, and it is recommended that we specify volumes for configuration, data, and log that offers by the Mosquitto. You can actually get all this information in the official Docker Mosquitto repository, as you can see here. So I will just quickly copy it. Volumes. I would like to define all this configuration in separate folder, but yeah, let's first paste this, then we can do this later. Config, I'll just copy and paste it. Yeah, that looks good. We also need to define ports. It's important to define port, otherwise we won't be able to connect that Mosquitto client from outside of the Docker container. 9001 is when using TCP connection, and that's it. But if you would like, you can also define the volumes name here as well, but it's not mandatory. Okay, that's it. So I will now run Docker container for the first time. Docker compose up, and I am not going to use D flag because there will be some error, I believe, that we might want to see. Let's give it a bit of time to pull all the images. Yeah, as you can see, Mosquitto Docker image is trying to find a Mosquitto configuration file, but we don't have any. Thus, it's showing an error. And if you look at the sidebar, you will see that the configuration directory has been created. So let's create a configuration file here called mosquitto.conf, and the you could just copy and paste the configuration file from this Eclipse Mosquitto GitHub repository and search for Mosquitto conf, but we are not going to copy and paste the whole configuration file because we only need a few of them. So I'll just go to the Mosquitto conf documentation, and I will only start with the file path for the Mosquitto configuration file and authentication file, password file, stuff like that. Yeah, so I'll first start with the allow anonymous to false. By default it is false, so in that case we actually don't need it unless you don't want to use any login credentials. So you could just set it to true and that should be fine. And since it's by default it's false, we don't need to define it. Let me show you what I mean. So anonymous, you see, by it's commented out, but if you read the doc, it says if set to false then a password file should be created and defaults to false. So yeah, and we need these on password file to define the password file path. So let's do it. Password file, that would be, so the Mosquitto directory is the required. You must need to write it whether you do have it or not on your local file system, but the rest is the config directory, is this config directory on the sidebar or on your local file system, and you could name it pw file or whatever you'd like. So I will just say password, but yeah, but we don't have the password file as well, so let's create that. I will open up a new terminal, but we will first need to find out the container name. So let's see. So the container name is mqtt, so we'll need to get into the relevant Docker container by executing a shell command. We now need to generate the password file from the Mosquitto itself, because it is some kinds of encryption. I don't know what that is. So we need to use the same path, Mosquitto config. You know, instead of using the password as the file name, why don't we call auth? Yeah. So I will say auth, and the next parameter would be the username. So I will just simply say magic, that's my initials, and I will say password as the password of the relevant user, and that's it. We can now exit, and if you see, we have a new auth file inside the config directory, and we also need to define listener to make sure the Mosquitto can listen on that specific port. 1883 is the port for general connection, but if you want to use TCP connection, you can define that as well. That would be 9001, and we also must need to define the protocol to WebSockets. And this is where I was stuck for almost an hour or so. And there are some few additional configuration that we could define, but those are optionals. For example, we could define the data and the logs, so directory, and since we define those in the Docker configuration file, I think we should do that. So let's do it. So that will be persistence to true, and persistence location would be Mosquitto data, and log test would be a file, and inside the directory called mosquitto log and mosquitto.log. I think we are good to go. By the way, guys, you could find all this information on the Mosquitto documentation, mosquitto.conf documentation, and if you see password file, you will see the relevant information here, or even persistence directory as well. As you can see, everything is here. So let's restart our Docker container. Docker is running here. I'll make sure that I remove the relevant Docker container as well. Now let's run again the gun. It says password file. I'm going to password file. Did I say anywhere password file? Unknown configuration variable password. Oh, hold on. I have a typo. Damn. Sorry about that, guys. Hold on a second. Let me fix it. Yeah, I think that should be good to go now. Docker compose up. Yeah, now it's running. So if I now docker compose ps, you see the port is 0000 binded to 1883 and 9001 is for the TCP protocol. So I think we are good to go. So let's test the connection. To test the connection, I would like to use MQTT-X. It's a cross-platform desktop client for MQTT. You could use anything else because there are a lot more, for example MQTT Explorer, but I will just start with MQTT-X. So let's start MQTT-X. Hold on a second. Here you go. So let me create a new connection. I will say the name, just empty Docker. You could use anything you'd like. The client ID is a random unique ID. You don't have to worry about that. So you could use MQTT-S for secure connection, and in that case the port would be 9001, but I will simply go with MQTT for the purpose of this video. And you could also define 0.0.0.0, but localhost is the same thing, so I will also leave it like that, and I already have the password set. And you will also need to enable SSL TLS option when you are going to use a secure connection, but it's fine for me. I am not going to use that. So let's connect. Yeah, it's connected. So to see whether it's working, we have to create a new subscription to listen to a specific topic. For example, I will just create a test topic. I don't need alias and everything else is fine. You also need to write the topic name here, and it's a JSON object, so I could just simply send the payload, and as you can see, we send the payload here, and since we have subscribed to the test topic, here it's returning the same message. So yeah, we have successfully installed and connected Mosquitto on a Docker container inside localhost. But if you'd like to use a different network, a different computer, a different device outside of a local network, that should be fine. But in that case, you will need to, in that case you will need to use your public IP instead of local host in the MQTT settings, but the port name would be the same. So yeah, that was it guys. I think maybe somebody could find this helpful. If not, that's fine, because this video is all about for myself as well. So in some days in future I could find these and just get started with the Mosquitto on a Docker container pretty quickly, instead of going back and forth and Googling or Stack Overflow,